Hey, Eloise here. I'm back with Claudia talking more about biogeometry. If you haven't watched the other video, watch that first. But to,
Exactly. That's
yeah,
part one.
yeah, the part
And
one. There's
nice
part
to be
two.
back.
And today we're going to talk about the history of biogeometry because some people may be finding this video and they've read all the books. I have some of them here, and some people may know nothing. But it would be lovely to talk about some of the background to biogeometry in a bit more depth.
Okay, let's get going. So biogeometry, as I mentioned in the other video, is bio, life, geo, the earth, metry, how to measure the earth. And Dr. Ibrahim Karim, who's Egyptian and who founded biogeometry over 50 years ago, um, kind of came into biogeometry by synchronistic events in his life. So he's coming from a family of architects. He also comes from a family of being very interested in Egyptian history and mythology and philosophy and the whole works and architecture. And after he finished his studies as an architect, he actually specialized in tourism planning and town planning. He got employed by different ministries in Egypt, and through that he got actually guided kind of by some fellow colleagues who were medical doctors, not necessarily architects. And through that guidance process, he was sent to go to Paris to visit I don't want to call it head office, but the house where the so-called physical radiesthesia had their location. Now, physical radiesthesia, let me define the words. Radiesthesia basically means sensitivity to radiation. So what is radiation really? So it's a specific energy quality. Now, in today's day and age, some people say I'm sensitive to sounds. I'm sensitive to smells, or I'm sensitive to special spots, to so-called power spots. Now, there's power spots that have what we call positive energy for us, and then there's power spots which have not so positive energy for us. And depending on what our course setup is, what we have been trained to um, believe in, but also how to live our life, we're sometimes more attractive to what's called the negative side. And others have been more attracted to the positive side. So people would not necessarily feel anymore, or have never felt really, what's really good and supportive for them. So that sensitivity, this level of radiesthesia, may have been lost. And this is something we see today a lot in the connection with so-called electromagnetic frequency. Okay. So coming back to radiesthesia, so a lot of people know about radiesthesia because they've heard of dowsing and using dowsing rods and whatever. And that's called mental radiesthesia, because generally as a radiesthesia person, you learn to ask questions subconsciously, but you're still asking questions, and you're getting a yes or no answer from whichever instrument you're using, whether it's a tensor or a pendulum or these rods, a certain movement. And that's a relatively subjective way. It's a good way of working, and the main issue that's been observed by many people who have practiced mental radiesthesia for many years. So a lot of times they get so much into resonance on a longer basis, and they can't get rid of that connection when they're looking for grid lines, Earth grid lines, which is kind of the energy pathways of our planet, like meridians in our body, or even if they're looking for water. Now we have underwater streams, so-called wine streams, that are beneficial. We have so-called black streams that are not beneficial, and so forth. So I have had quite a few, actually, radiesthesia people also in my classes, and they always said, why didn't I learn this 30 years ago? So they literally felt the big difference, and the big difference in the application of physical radiesthesia versus mental radiesthesia, and also what it does to their system or what it doesn't do. So that's the big thing. So physical radiesthesia is basically a way of being, yes, sensitive to radiation, to whatever information or wavelength quality our pendulums, which would be calibrated. So we have one pendulum that's calibrated by wavelength. We have another pendulum that's calibrated by shape. We have another pendulum that's calibrated by color quality, and so forth. So those are the three main pendulums that we use in the foundation training. And the big difference is really that I'm a very important part of the measurement as the biogeometry person, but at the same time, it's just because I become part of the measurement because I'm in resonance with that wavelength. But I always have what we call the protective factor and the neutrality aspect and objective aspect of the physical radiesthesia approach as it's done or used in biogeometry. And so it's doesn't drain our energies, and we rather feel energized after our work, and so it's very, very important. So this is when Dr. Karim basically was sent to Egypt. He was to Paris from Egypt. He was handed over ancient documents from the French radiesthesia line. And, the lady who was the wife of one of the late radiesthesia persons in France, she said, finally you're coming. We've been waiting for you. So that's why I'm saying it's a series of synchronistic events. Now, Dr. Karim already had pendulums because one was handed down by this colleague I mentioned. Then another one was handed down by his grandfather. And so he was very intrigued by all of that. And so he put one and one together. He also studied geology. He studied biobiology and other fields in this line. And so he could literally see the bigger and bigger picture, how important it is as an architect to really understand the concept of being a sculptor of space, which means I have to design a space that actually has, like in the ancient times, a healthy energy quality that helps the inhabitants. Okay, so that's a kind of a bit of a way into the history of biogeometry.
So, can we talk about the physics of quality? Because that's quite often how we reference biogeometry when people ask. Yeah. Can we talk
Exactly.
more about that?
So when I was actually studying for my writing my thesis, for as part of the doctorate PhD program, I had to dive a lot into, because it was based on quantum physics, into the background of physics. So we have the classical physics, which is often referred to the Newtonian or even Cartesian, approach and viewpoint of life, which was introduced more or less like 300 years ago, just to go in a rough time frame. And the interesting part for me was to understand that Newton, whom we know today, based on the laws of Newton and so forth, he actually didn't call himself a physicist. He called himself a natural philosopher or nature philosopher. So I thought it was very interesting. So the term physics as such is not as old as I thought it would be. Okay. So, however, we also, especially if you go through life and think more holistically and more integrated as such, seeing in a human being that we have body, mind, and spirit, and that's kind of one unit of function. And biogeometry, we talk about the different layers and planes of nature. So we have the physical, we also have the mental, and we also have the spiritual. And then as an adult, we have the so-called vital and emotional layers. And so that's always one unit of function. But in our so-called modern world, these three levels have been separated. And so we have a specialist for that, and we have a specialist for that, and we have a specialist for that. And they don't talk. Apart from that, they don't understand the other layers and levels. So it seems, because I'm not trying to be judgmental here. I'm just, stating my experiences and observations. So what is called a scientific approach today is based on the Newtonian and Cartesian approach, which related to the fact that they use specific, obviously today it's all electronics, but specific measurement tools which are quantitative. Okay, and so so the whole aspect of quality and exactly also what Newton and Descartes actually were still connected with the whole idea of how is nature functioning. Was their research, right? Has been lost today. So it's all, I cannot measure it, or I cannot touch it, see it, smell it, taste it. I don't have a
Doesn't
device
exist.
that measures it. It doesn't exist. You know, so and this is how people's experience is. When you go to the doctor, they do blood tests, they measure your blood pressure, you know, and so forth. Anyway, and so, but then over 100 years ago, you know, there was a new approach to physics, which is now today called quantum physics. And those specific people and special brains, you know, they had special meetings, they had founded lots of different things. Not to go too much into naming and details of that, but they also had conferences, and they just couldn't how do you say that, become conventional. So what would be incorporated at that time. But quantum physics actually is the basics of everything, you know, as in technology specifically that we use today in our life. You know, understanding that everything is kind of connected, and there is the aspect of entanglement. So which means once you have been connected with something, you're always connected. And if something happens here, you know, it has to be mirrored on the other end of the planet or on the other end of the universe. So again, I don't want to go too much into these technical aspects, but nevertheless, so when I was studying, writing my thesis, I obviously had already been in connection with biogeometry. So I added actually the physics of quality. So yes, quantum physics is there and it's understandable, you know, so we have that relationship between time and space and so forth. But for me, the physics of quality brings it all home. So for me, that's the most modern approach of physics. But that's my personal take on that. So the question is really, what does that mean? So if I talk a bit about how Dr. Karim describes it, so we have what we call everything that is manifest and even not manifest, but everything that is present. He calls it the absolute or the absolute reality. And but then we're all individual beings, so with our five senses. So we have the physical senses and we have the subtle senses, which are more often called and termed the intuitive aspect of sense. You know, so we are kind of connecting. So there's information coming, or information of there is the vibration coming from the absolute, and it's kind of coming into manifestation. So which means coming from a non-vibrational into vibration. In the moment there's vibration, we have let's say plus and minus or something like that, and that is being detected by the different senses. Now, in its general sense, from the original state, it's the same information and the same reaction in our nervous system happens, and then it's split up into the five senses. Now, this is something that is happening without our doing and our mental involvement. And then we come into, this is very much in the objective part, or what we call the qualitative part of manifestation. And then I mentioned it early on, you know, we all have our stories. So we have inherited stories, we have acquired stories in life, which means we have our idea how things should be or not be, you know, whether we should be afraid of that or not, and whether something gives us joy or not. So we have already our mental program. So whenever a neutral, call it, I can't think of the word right now, but let's call it a spark, is coming in, through our interpretation, it becomes very subjective, which means very personal. So whatever we perceive then, that's more coming into the conscious mind and the subjective and the quantitative. Whatever we perceive then is basically perceived. Okay, so in biogeometry, and so we could perceive the same thing, but we have completely different interpretations. Let's just give a different example. I'm waiting at the bus stop, and the bus is not coming. So I could freak out, or I could just say, "Oh, Louise is so relaxed," but the bus is not coming. So it's something really based on our own story. And so by geometry, obviously, we can work on those stories as well. But nevertheless, the point is, physics of quality is trying to um, get back to the approach of let's base our life on quality. We've already called it is life quality, quality of living, quality of life,
Yeah,
not
yeah.
quantity, quality of life. So with our tools, we are kind of going beyond or not even going into the subjective or mental aspect, but we're sticking to the qualitative level. And the physics of quality is based a lot on the laws of resonance. Okay, so one thing being in tune with the other, and also which means information exchange. And I think that's the key word really we have to remember when we talk about resonance. And so what is an information? What is exchanging information with what? And what is what we call stronger? It's not the right word because it's polarizing, but then something else. So if I have that sacred, ancient DG3 energy quality present and specific supportive, harmonizing and correcting, let's say, color qualities or so forth, then it's very unlikely that I will be so affected by the outer environment. I'm not talking physics as such, but still going into the idea of physics of quality, being very practical, very connected to everyday living and where what.
Mm. I think when you mention quality of life, I think that's something everyone strives for, but how do we define it? It's like it is more of a feeling than a what's in your bank account or whatever we
Exactly,
might try and
exactly,
quantitatively measure.
exactly. Yeah, and it's also being content with, whatever there is. That doesn't mean we shouldn't have excellence in action, right? And always striving to be a divine being and connected to everything and everyone. But nevertheless, that's the important.
Mm. Awesome. Thank you, Claudia. That's really great way of talking about it and thinking about biogeometry.